Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight and sharing this time with us. And I want to say, I really like that poster, Peace and Agriculture. I've never seen anything like that, but it really, just given the issue of what people are calling food justice and the relationship between food and access to food and sufficient food and climate change. So I think it's kind of a very nice statement. Looks like it's been around for a while, so it's good that somebody's been thinking about this. Just a little bit about Communities for a Better Environment. We organize in Northern California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and in Southeast Los Angeles, between the downtown Los Angeles and the ports. Ports of LA and Long Beach together are some of the largest ports, are like the largest ports in the world, and 80% of all the goods that come in from the Pacific Rim come in through those ports. So that means we have cargo ships with the worst kinds of diesel. We've got rail, we've got diesel trucks, we've got all kind of the supporting machinery that usually operates on diesel. So it's the number one industrial polluter in the Los Angeles region. In the Los Angeles region, that kind of whole area, if you take in Riverside, San Bernardino, is about 18 million people at least. And we have the worst air quality in the country, unfortunately. We don't like to do we're number one, but unfortunately we are number one in that. And in California, generally, there's an estimate, the higher end estimate. They used to say that there was about 3,000 to 6,000 deaths every year due to air quality. Now they're saying it's 18,000 to 24,000 deaths a year. So if we think about that, if we want to kind of make some comparisons, the Twin Towers, 3,000 people were killed. So take 6 Twin Towers per year, and that's how many people died because of poor air quality. And the majority of those are lower income people of color that suffer from this. In Northern California, we work in Richmond Contra Costa area, which is a large refinery community. California is the 3rd largest refinery state in the country. And we also work in Oakland, which is the area where we work is mostly working class African American and Latino community, right near the one of the larger, near the port of, not too far from the port of Oakland, and also near a large freeway where a lot of the truck traffic goes through. And I think they estimate there's something like 40,000 diesel trips a day through that neighborhood, near that neighborhood where we organize. And we've been a part of, before AB 32 was passed, this AB 32 is our greenhouse gas legislation, there was some input from the environmental justice community, and we were very concerned. Originally, Governor Schwarzenegger wanted to make the whole thing a cap-and-trade program, and we were able to keep that out. What it says is that they can use market mechanisms, but it doesn't mandate market mechanisms. But from Jump Street, he wanted to make it a cap-and-trade program, a pollution trading program. That's a more accurate way to state it. It's pollution trading. It means people have the right to pollute. And the other thing that there were some other aspects of this legislation that the EJ community impacted. One, it said that the state should make every effort to implement this law in a way that would benefit the most disproportionately impacted communities, disproportionately in terms of pollution impacts, and really seek to maximize benefits around co-pollutants. So we know that when CO2 comes out of a smokestack, it doesn't come out by itself. It comes out with mercury, benzene, sulfur oxide, all kinds of stuff that's more immediately toxic to the communities that live nearby. So that was the other thing. And then the third thing, that there was some other things, but there was the third thing that was kind of really important is it mandated that there be a representative environmental justice advisory committee to advise the Air Resources Board on the plan for implementing this in a way that would really make certain that our communities were not harmed and would actually benefit, so that we would actually capture the spirit of the legislation. And so you should just know that before the ink on the legislation was dry, the governor issued an executive order that said this is going to be a cap-and-trade program. So, right away he just said, this is what I want. And when the original president of the board, of the Air Resources Board, I think expressed some hesitancy, he whacked him and appointed somebody else. He appointed someone who was more politically in tune with this idea. And the second thing you should know is that this Environmental Justice Advisory Committee was composed of representatives from environmental justice organizations, most of whom have very little resources. We have more resources than probably most of the group, all the groups that were on that committee. So we have researchers on our staff. We have attorneys on our staff. So it gives us some advantage in looking at some of the measures that the Air Resources Board was proposing. Now, our expertise is around oil refineries, so we focused a lot on that. But there was like just, dozens and dozens of kinds of measures that were being considered. This committee didn't get a penny. No help, no support. They paid our travel. If we were outside of this Capitol in Sacramento, we had to buy our own lunches, box lunches. So here we are in a community, in a state which is a majority communities of color, when it's acknowledged that the communities of color suffer the worst in terms of the pollution burden. And the folks that are trying to advise this committee on this very complex undertaking, imagine trying to develop a greenhouse gas legislation for a state of 40 million people. The hedge funds made out like bandits, like here, and there was all kinds of fraud. I mean, it's just kind of built, it's just kind of an enormous risk that accompanies this kind of a program. And you can imagine, so, for example, they say, a polluter says, well, I'm going to buy some credits, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant 5,000 carbon-gulping trees in Botswana. And so I can keep my power plant, my coal-fired power plant operating in Boston. Well, who's going to go to Botswana? So how long does it take to plant the trees? And are you even going to consult with the people of Botswana to say that's what they want? Then are you going to go check when they plant the trees so that it takes 20 years for the trees to grow? Is there an equivalency between those 5,000 trees or 5,000 acres of trees and the 50 years in which that coal-fired power plant operates? I mean, it's just an enormously difficult, complicated undertaking that's just almost built to fail. So we said, look, why don't we go by the evidence? The evidence says that regulation is the best way to reduce emissions. And so I'll give you an example. I don't know if you're familiar with how oil refineries work, but you'll see this thing that comes out of the smokestacks. You'll see the flames come out. They call that flaring. It's when they have these excess gases, and they release them through the smokestack, and they burn. It's really toxic, really nasty. So in California, they're only supposed to do it in cases of emergency. And it turns out that there's technology to capture most of these gases. But you do need it in case of emergency because you don't want the refinery to explode. So we fought for, so they were just flaring all the time, all these refineries up in Northern California and Southern California. And people were choking, and the Air Quality Management District would say, well, we have a plan, close your doors, close your windows, and that was the plan. So we, waged a big campaign, and we got the strictest flaring regulations in the country in both the Bay Area and Southern California. And flaring incidents, non-emergency flaring incidents, went to 0. Easy to measure, verifiable, transparent, impactful. So when people talk about, what's the word they use? They don't say regulation, they call it control or command measures. We say this works. It worked for DDT. We didn't do a DDT trading program. It was poisoning people. Now, unfortunately, they shipped it to the global south. But here in this country, we got rid of DDT. It was bad. It was killing people. It was bad for the environment. We got rid of it. So we said, look, but we think this should be done in a thoughtful way. The big polluters who have created the problem should pay. Polluters should pay, and small and medium-sized businesses should be given help. We should help them. There should be incentives, there should be loans, there should be whatever it takes to help people do, to reduce their emissions. So I think we had some very, very thoughtful proposals. Everyone, it was consensus. And then we said, when the plan came out and they ignored everything, we said, what happened? We said, we have no idea. We have no idea. Obviously, it was a political decision. So it forced most of the members of the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, we had to sue the Air Resources Board. We didn't say throw out AB 32. We said do it over, get it right. I mean, there was just a whole number of pieces that were problematic. Like, for example, the way they set the baseline was bogus. We just said if you don't get the baseline right, then how do you really know if you're getting the emissions that you're supposed to get? And California's, I think we're, the 9th largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. So we're, what California does really can have an impact, and hopefully it would serve as a good model. So I just want to say that, you know, the environmental justice community, and, you know, organizations which generally, you know, work in the poorest of our communities, don't have a lot of resources. I mean, we were talking to some funders today where of all the money that foundations give for environmental work, less than 1% now, I think, goes to environmental justice organizations. So it's a very, very small percentage that actually gets into these organizations that work in the poorest communities with the greatest need. But in spite of that, I think we're able to, we really are doing some remarkable work. And I want to give you kind of a positive example. So forget the bureaucrats for a second. You know, they weren't responsive, and, you know, but we're continuing to work and to push them to do the right thing. Well, all this was going on in southeast Los Angeles. There's a little city called Vernon. It's an industrial city. It has about 100 registered voters, but about 50,000 people that work there. It's just a cash cow. They just have all these industries and stuff. So they decided that the people that run that city, it's one family that's pretty much run it for years. They pay their city manager, remember, 100 registered voters, pay their city manager something like around $600,000–700,000 a year. How much did the president get? About $400,000, right? Yeah. Yeah, I think they had to get their own 401k or something. Anyway, so it's kind of this weird little city where they've, you know, all the people that vote there either work for the city or live in city housing, so they, you know, who do they vote for? So they wanted to speculate on the energy industry, and they wanted to build a 943 megawatt fossil fuel power plant in the most densely populated, highly polluted region of Los Angeles, southeast LA. And we organized, it was mainly Latina women, immigrants, and high school students, and we stopped this plant. We stopped it. It took 3 years, but we stopped this plant. It's funny, when this campaign started, our organizers were talking to me, and they said, Bill, what do you think about it? Should we do this? And I said, no, this is you know, we'll never win this thing. It's crazy. But our community wanted to do it, so we did it. And the community was right, and we stopped this plant. And it's a good model because there's, on the drawing board, or people pushing for applications, there are 24 similar plants throughout California. So it's, now people know in these other communities that you can stop these things. But I want to say that, you know, when they stopped this plant, these plants operate for 40 or 50 years, it prevented 2.5 million tons of greenhouse gases from going into the air every single year. Every single year. So we said to them, you know, we said, you are sheroes. You are, I mean, they talk about Leonardo DiCaprio, they talk about Al Gore. What you're doing is just as significant and important. And it demonstrated that people can do this if they're organized, if they have good political strategy. Even the poorest folks, you know, a lot of these folks work 2 jobs. They don't, or even when they work a job, it's not a 40-hour week. You know, folks who, you know, what I would call working poor, organized this campaign, and they won. And I think that's an outstanding example and an alternative to these kind of fake solutions like pollution trading.